The snow had barely melted from the April gardens when the two pink lines appeared on the test Monica held in trembling hands. She stared at them in the marble bathroom of their private wing, the same bathroom where Daniel had once shown her the panic button, the escape route, the 17 ways death could come for Makiza. He had walked her through every exit like a man who'd memorized the architecture of catastrophe. And now she stood in the same room, holding a piece of plastic that rewrote every calculation they had ever made. Because an heir didn't just secure an empire. It painted a bullseye on the back of the woman carrying one. Before we begin, I need your help. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one matters. If you enjoy forbidden romance and stories of dangerous men who'd burn the world for the ones they love, please hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment telling me your city or country. It means the world to know our stories are reaching you wherever you are. She'd been standing there for 11 minutes, she knew, because the clock on the marble vanity had been ticking in the silence, each second louder than the last, when the door opened without a knock. Daniel never knocked. In 6 months of marriage, she had come to understand that was simply the way of him. He moved through the world like he owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. His winter ice eyes flicked to the test in her hand, then to her face. And something cracked, not broke. Daniel Makiza never broke, but cracked, a hairline fracture running through 30 years of unbreakable composure, letting something raw and terrible and beautiful spill through. "You're carrying my child," he said, and his voice was low, reverent, the voice of a man making a vow in a language he thought he'd buried with Isabel. He crossed the bathroom in 3 strides and pulled her against him, one hand pressing flat against her still flat stomach, the other cradling the back of her head. Monica felt the warmth of him, the absolute certainty of his grip, and beneath it, beneath the tenderness, she felt the shift. The world had just become more dangerous. "No one touches you," he said into her hair, quiet as a prayer and absolute as a death sentence. "No one touches them. I will burn every enemy to ash before they get within a mile of you." Monica closed her eyes. She felt the thrill of it, power and danger and love twisted into something so fierce it was indistinguishable from violence. But in the silence that followed, pressed against the chest of the most dangerous man she'd ever loved, she knew the truth with cold, clear certainty. An heir didn't just secure the Makiza dynasty. It made her the most valuable target in the city. And somewhere out there, in the wreckage of everything Daniel had dismantled, the survivors were already watching, already counting, already calculating the precise value of the heartbeat growing inside her. Monica Makiza had survived betrayal, cyanide, a siege, and her own resurrection. Now she had to survive becoming a mother. She took 3 more tests. Because Monica Makiza, did not make decisions on single data points. She had learned that from Daniel, who ran every intelligence report through 3 independent sources before acting, who treated certainty like a luxury and verification like oxygen. She had absorbed his methodology the way she had absorbed everything about this life, quickly, completely, and without sentiment. All 3 tests said the same thing. She sat on the edge of the bath, the 4 tests lined up on the marble vanity like a chorus of pink judgment, and she did something she had not done since the night she walked out of Julian's library. She cried. Not the quiet, composed tears of a woman in control of her grief, but ugly, gasping, genuine weeping, the kind that stripped the performance away and left nothing but the raw truth underneath. She was terrified. She was joyful. She was furious at herself for both. Daniel found her before she could compose herself, and for once she didn't try. She let him see it, all of it, the fear and the wonder and the way her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had promised herself she would not be small in this marriage, would not be the decorative, fragile thing that shattered at the first pressure. But there were kinds of vulnerability that weren't weakness. She was learning that too. His reaction undid her completely. The man who had overseen the Red Autumn, who had buried 37 attempts on his life with clinical efficiency, who had looked into the barrel of every threat this city could conjure and never flinched, that man went completely, utterly still. And then something moved across his face that she had no word for. Joy, yes. Possessive, consuming joy. But underneath it, threading through it like a dark current, was fear so visceral it was almost grief. He knew what this meant. Better than she did, he knew. We need to tell Marcus, he said, after a long moment, and the word "we" landed in her chest like a warm stone. Not I'll handle it. Not I'll tell Marcus. We. I need a doctor first, she said. I have one. 3, actually. All vetted, all on retainer, all bound by contracts that would ruin their families if they speak. He was already pulling out his phone, already moving with the particular efficiency of a man redirecting his fear into logistics. You'll have the best prenatal care in the country, here, in the private wing, with security present at every appointment. Monica wiped her face with the back of her hand. Daniel. The nursery will need to be in the interior rooms, no exterior walls. The ballistic glass isn't rated for. Daniel. She crossed the bathroom and put both hands on his face, tilting it down until his eyes met hers. The phone stilled in his hand. I'm not fragile. I know. I'm still co-head of this family. I know. And if you try to lock me in this wing for the next 8 months, I will make your life extraordinarily difficult. His expression shifted, something complicated moving through it. Then, slowly, reluctantly, the ghost of a smile. You're the only person on earth who threatens me and makes me feel better simultaneously. I'm aware. She kissed him once, firm and brief. Now call your vetted doctors. And then you're going to sit with me and we're going to discuss, calmly, what this means for operations, for security, and for the Volkov remnants Marcus flagged last week. Together. The word landed like a contract. Daniel's hand found her waist, drawing her close again, his chin coming to rest on the top of her head in the particular way that meant he was thinking hard and didn't want her to see his face. Together, he agreed. And then, because he was Daniel Makiza and could never entirely separate protection from possession, but you're getting a second panic room. The security briefing that followed lasted 4 hours. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes of Daniel's call, already wearing the expression of a man recalculating threat assessments in real time. He sat across from them at the library table, tablet in hand, and listened with the focused stillness of a weapon being aimed. When Daniel finished speaking, Marcus was quiet for 3 full seconds, an eternity for Marcus. Congratulations, he said finally. Then, we have a problem. The problem, as Marcus laid it out with characteristic economy of emotion, was that pregnancy changed Monica's threat profile in 4 specific ways. It limited her mobility. It created a predictable medical schedule. It gave enemies a secondary target. And it introduced the possibility of leverage that hadn't existed before. A wife could be replaced, in the cold mathematics of a dynasty. An heir could not. The Volkov remnants are quiet, Marcus said. Too quiet. Petrov absorbed what was left of their operation after Dmitri disappeared, and Petrov is smart. Patient. He wouldn't move against us directly. But he would move against a vulnerability. Then we don't show him one, Monica said. Both men looked at her. She met their gazes evenly, refusing to feel like a problem being solved rather than a person in the room. We announce nothing publicly. We change the security rotation now, before there's any visible reason to. We handle the business schedules exactly as planned, my meeting with the museum board, the Bratva negotiation, the quarterly review. Nothing changes on the surface. She paused. And I want to be in those security briefings. All of them. Not the summaries Daniel approves for me. The actual briefings. Another silence. Marcus glanced at Daniel. Daniel's jaw was tight, the muscle at his temple working in that way that meant he was winning a battle with himself. All of them, he said finally. Monica felt the quiet enormity of that concession. She filed it away carefully, not as a victory, but as evidence of the kind of partnership they were still, daily, building. Outside the library windows, April was beginning to soften into something warmer. The estate gardens blazed with color, absurd and beautiful and completely indifferent to the empire being recalibrated within its walls. Monica watched a bird land on the stone balustrade and then take off again, gone before she could track where it went. That evening, she stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom and pressed her hand flat against her stomach. Still flat. No visible evidence of the seismic shift that had occurred. From across the room, Daniel watched her with an expression she'd only seen on his face twice before, once on their wedding night, and once on the rooftop when he'd told her about Isabel. "I'm not her," Monica said quietly, without turning around. "I know. I won't break." "Monica." His reflection moved toward hers in the mirror, his hands settling on her shoulders, his face coming into frame beside hers. "I know." He paused. "That's what terrifies me. You are the strongest person I've ever stood beside. And I still lost the last one I loved like this." She covered his hands with hers. They stood like that for a long moment, their reflections joined in the glass, the silver-haired man with the careful eyes and the woman who had rebuilt herself from someone else's betrayal into something neither of them had anticipated. Behind them, the darkened room held its breath. "Then don't lose me," she said. "Not to grief before it happens. Not to a cage you build out of fear. Stand beside me, Daniel. That's all I need." His grip tightened. "Done," he said. And meant it. And broke it within 48 hours, because love and terror are indistinguishable when they live in the same body, and Daniel Makiza had 30 years of evidence that the things he loved had expiration dates. But that was Chapter 2's problem. For now, they stood in the mirror, and the empire held, and somewhere in Monica Makiza the size of a secret, a new life was quietly, defiantly beginning. The new security detail appeared without discussion. Monica noticed them first on a Wednesday morning, 2 additional bodies positioned outside the private wing's elevator, a third visible from the breakfast room window. Patrol patterns shifted to cover the East Garden approach that had previously been a lower priority zone. She cataloged each change with the methodical attention Daniel had spent 6 months teaching her, and she said nothing. She ate her breakfast, reviewed the morning reports Marcus had forwarded, and made her 8 o'clock call with the head of their shipping operation without mentioning it. She gave Daniel 3 days to address it himself. He didn't. On the 4th day, she walked out of the estate through the front gate, alone, without informing anyone, wearing civilian clothes and carrying nothing but her encrypted phone and the car keys to the modest Audi that she'd insisted on keeping a small. Deliberate continuity with the woman she'd been, some private proof that Monica Gray still existed somewhere beneath Monica Makiza. She drove 4 blocks before the black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror. She pulled into a coffee shop, parked, and called Daniel. "You have 30 seconds to tell me why there are 4 bodies between me and every door in this house," she said, when he picked up. The pause was almost imperceptible. "Almost. I upgraded the rotation. You tripled it. And added the garden coverage. And I noticed the elevator has a new camera that wasn't there Monday." She kept her voice level. This was not a fight. This was a negotiation, and she was better at those now than she had been. "I understand why. I don't disagree with better security. What I disagree with is you making unilateral decisions about my movement without telling me." Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him breathing, could picture the particular stillness that came over him when he was losing an argument he hadn't admitted was an argument. "Come home," he said. "I'm getting coffee. Then I have a meeting with the museum board that's been on the schedule for 2 weeks." She paused. "The one you didn't cancel. Thank you for that." "Monica. 2 bodyguards, Daniel. That's what we agreed. Not 4, not 6. 2. And they follow my protocols, not yours." She ended the call before he could respond, which she knew was a small cruelty, but small cruelties were sometimes the only language that got through the armor. The museum board meeting was exquisitely normal. 12 people in a glass-walled conference room discussing acquisition strategy for the fall collection, debating the merits of 2 competing contemporary artists, arguing about budget allocations with the passionate theatrics of people who had never had to worry about money but treated institutional spending like a moral battlefield. Monica sat at the table's corner, contributed 3 times, moved 2 agenda items forward that had been stalled for weeks, and accepted the board chair's praise for her work on the Caravaggio retrospective with the practiced modesty of someone who had learned to be underestimated until the moment came to stop. The bodyguards waited in the lobby. 2 of them, as agreed. She was 15 minutes from the estate when the call came from Marcus. Volkov remnant activity in Brighton Beach, he said. Low level, probably reconnaissance. Nothing actionable yet. But someone's asking questions about your schedule. Monica felt the cold settle into her chest, familiar now, a companion rather than a shock. How did they get my schedule? We're looking. Probably social media. Your appearance at the board meeting was listed on the museum's public calendar. A pause. Daniel wants you back at the estate. I'm already on my way. She glanced at the rear view, at the two-vehicle convoy behind her. How low level? A man asking questions at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the museum. Could be nothing. Could be establishing pattern of life. Pattern of life. The term had been abstract to her 6 months ago, the kind of phrase you heard in spy films and filed away as fiction. Now it lived in her body as visceral awareness, the understanding that somewhere, someone was watching her move through the world and recording the rhythms of her existence, mapping the architecture of her life to find the seams where violence could enter. She was 3 months pregnant. She was co-head of an empire. She was sitting in traffic and someone was building a file on her daily habits. She spent the rest of the drive doing what she always did when the fear threatened to crystallize into paralysis. She thought through the response. Not the emotional response, the operational one. If reconnaissance was already underway, the schedule needed disruption. The museum board meetings needed to rotate venues. Her public appearances needed to become unpredictable, varied, stripped of the comfortable patterns that made a target legible. Daniel met her in the foyer with his jaw set and his eyes doing that rapid, invisible inventory that meant he was checking her for damage. I'm fine, she said. You left without telling me. I drove 4 blocks to make a point and then called you immediately. She handed her jacket to the waiting staff and turned to face him fully. The point, since you're going to ask, is that you are not my warden. You're my partner. Those are very different roles. The point, he stopped. Started again. There was an incident at the museum. Marcus told me. Reconnaissance, probably. She moved toward the library. So let's discuss how to disrupt the schedule and make my movements less predictable. Together. She said the last word with a particular weight that made it land like a reminder. Daniel followed her. It was not a comfortable 3 hours. The argument beneath the argument, the one neither of them named directly, was the oldest one, his terror versus her autonomy, his need to control every variable that touched her against her refusal to be managed like a variable. They had navigated it before. They would navigate it again. But the pregnancy had shifted the weight of it, loaded every exchange with the unspoken awareness that his overprotection, however suffocating, was built on grief rather than malice. She understood that. She would not let it swallow her anyway. They reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them completely, which was, Monica had come to understand, the definition of a functional negotiation. She agreed to expanded security and advanced route planning. He agreed to be briefed rather than consulted on her schedule, an important distinction. She would not ask permission. She would share information. The first tremor of morning sickness arrived at 11 that night, precisely when she was reviewing supply chain reports and feeling most formidably professional. She sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes while Daniel crouched beside her and held her hair back with the same hands that had signed men's death warrants, and neither of them said anything at all. It was, in its way, one of the most intimate moments of their marriage. I hate this, she said eventually, meaning the nausea, meaning the vulnerability, meaning the particular indignity of the body asserting itself against the will. I know, he said, smoothing her hair back. I'm still going to the Bratva meeting next week. I know. A pause. I'll be in the next room. She laughed, short and exhausted. Compromise. Compromise, he agreed, and pressed a kiss to her temple with the gentleness of a man who is still, against all evidence, learning how to be soft with the things he loved without letting that softness become their undoing. Somewhere in Brighton Beach, a man with Volkov connections filed his reconnaissance report and waited for instructions. The next chapter was already writing itself. The message arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, routed through 3 encrypted servers and a dead drop account that only 2 living people knew existed. Monica stared at it for a long time before she told anyone. The sender ID was a string of numbers that meant nothing. The message itself was 11 words. I know who's building the file. I need 1 hour. Julian. She sat with it for 37 minutes, turning it over in her mind with the careful, methodical attention she brought to everything now. Julian was in Argentina. Had been for 6 months, living on the stipend she had specified, in the small town whose name she couldn't pronounce, under the watchful eyes of 2 of Daniel's men who reported weekly. He had not attempted contact. The arrangement had settled into a kind of grim permanence, the exile holding its shape because all parties had agreed, in different ways, that it was preferable to the alternatives. And now 11 words on an encrypted channel. She called Marcus before she called Daniel. Not because she was hiding it, she had learned, at some cost, that secrets between her and Daniel were structural failures that weakened everything, but because she needed to understand what she was dealing with before she walked into that conversation. Marcus arrived within 20 minutes, looking at his phone the way he always looked at things that required precise calibration, with flat, assessing focus and no visible emotion. The account is clean, he said, after running his checks. No malware, no trace embedded. Someone sophisticated sent this. He looked up. Could be a setup. Used Julian's name to get you somewhere vulnerable. Could be, Monica agreed. Or Julian could actually know something. How would he know who's running reconnaissance on you? He's in Argentina. His mother's family was from Moscow. He grew up knowing every name in the Russian organized crime world before he knew how to drive. She paused. Daniel used to say Julian's greatest failure was choosing the wrong loyalties. Not that he didn't have the instincts. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, you have to tell Daniel. I know. He's not going to like it. I know. He's going to want to send someone to Argentina too. I know, Marcus. She stood, straightening her jacket with the particular precision she used when preparing for things she didn't want to do. Set up the conversation. I'll handle Daniel. She did not, as it turned out, entirely handle Daniel. He read the message in silence. Set the phone down on the desk between them with the careful, deliberate stillness that she had learned to read as the outer surface of controlled fury. His hands were flat against the mahogany. His breathing was measured. From the outside, he looked like a man reviewing routine correspondence. She had been married to him for 6 months. She knew better. He's been dark for 6 months, Daniel said finally. No contact. No deviation from the conditions. A pause. And now this. Now this, she agreed. It's a manipulation. It might be. He wants back in. He wants reduced conditions, more money, a path back to the city. He's using intelligence as currency. Also possible. Monica laced her fingers on the desk. And if he actually knows who's building pattern of life on me and we don't find out and that information leads to an attack, then I'll handle the attack. The way you handled the last one? With a siege at 3 in the morning and your people in the hallways. She kept her voice level. Daniel, I am 4 months pregnant. I am trying very hard to be honest with you about what I need, which is information rather than fortress walls. If Julian has information that keeps us ahead of whatever Petrov is planning, you are not meeting Julian. I didn't say I was. She met his eyes. I said we need to consider whether the information has value. The silence stretched. Daniel's jaw worked in that way that meant the argument was not over, but he had run out of ammunition for this round. He pushed back from the desk and moved to the window, staring out at the estate gardens with his hands clasped behind his back, which was always the posture of a man retreating into deliberation. Marcus, who had been very carefully not existing in the corner of the room, sent Julian a single-word reply through the encrypted channel, conditions. Julian's response came within 4 minutes. He knew the name of Petrov's inside contact. Not the reconnaissance operative, the inside contact. Someone within the estate's extended network who had been feeding information to the Volkov remnants for at least 6 weeks. He would provide the name, full documentation, and the method of contact in exchange for one thing, a conversation with Monica. Not Daniel. Monica. 30 minutes, encrypted video, no conditions on what she could say. Daniel read the response and said nothing for a very long time. He blames me, Monica said quietly. For the exile. He thinks I'm the reason you chose mercy over the alternative. He's not wrong. So he wants to look me in the eye and say something he needs to say. She paused. Or he genuinely has information and he knows that going through me is the only way you'll trust it. Both, Daniel said. Probably both. He turned from the window. His face had done the thing it occasionally did, let the calculation drop away and show the man underneath, the one who had loved a woman once and raised a boy alone and built an empire out of the wreckage of both. I don't want you in a room with him. Not even a virtual room. I know. He sold you to people who put cyanide in your champagne. I know, Daniel. I know. She stood and crossed to him, stopping close enough that he had no choice but to look at her rather than through her. And I also know that if there's a mole in our network and we don't find them before they move, the consequences land on all of us. Including the baby. She let that sit for a moment. 30 minutes. Encrypted video. Marcus monitors the call. You can be in the next room. And if Julian says anything that sounds like a threat or a manipulation, I walk away. His hand came to her face before he decided to move it, cupping her jaw with the particular gentleness that always undid something in her chest. He's going to try to make you feel something, Daniel said. Guilt, probably. He's very good at that. I know. She turned her head slightly, pressing her lips to his palm for one brief moment. I'm also very good at not feeling what I'm told to feel. 3 days later, the encrypted call was arranged. Marcus sat 3 feet away. Daniel paced the adjacent room, invisible but present, which was the most she could negotiate. Julian's face appeared on the screen and he looked diminished. Not physically, not dramatically, he was still handsome in his father's mold, same strong jaw, same dark hair, same architectural certainty of feature. But something behind the eyes had been rearranged. As if the scaffolding had been removed from a building and you could see, for the first time, what was actually holding it up. Or what wasn't. Monica, he said. Julian. She kept her expression neutral. You have information. Give it to me. I need to say something first. No, she said simply. You don't. Whatever you need to say to feel better about what you did, keep it. I'm not a confessor. Give me the information. A pause. Something moved across his face that she refused to name. There's a woman on the museum board, he said finally. Elena Vasquez. She's been there 3 years. She's also on Petrov's payroll. Has been since before you joined the board. He sent through a file as he spoke, documents, communications, financial records. She's the one who flagged your schedule. She's the reason Petrov knew about the charity event, the reason your routes have been. Monica was already scanning the documents. Real. The watermarks, the account numbers, the metadata, Marcus would verify, but her instincts, honed to a razor's edge after 6 months in this world, said real. How did you get this? She asked. I have more time than I used to, Julian said quietly. And fewer illusions. A pause. I know what I did. I'm not asking for anything except that you stay alive long enough for me to live with having done it. Monica looked at her ex-boyfriend's face on the screen, the man she had thought she loved in another life, the man who had sold her for the price of a clean exit and found, with some surprise, that what she felt was not hatred. It was something closer to the particular sadness of watching someone understand themselves too late. Noted, she said, and closed the call. In the next room, she heard Daniel stop pacing. Elena Vasquez was handled on a Thursday. Monica insisted on being in the room for it, not the room where Marcus conducted his interrogations, which she had been in exactly once and had chosen never to revisit, but the room afterward, when the information had been extracted and the decisions needed to be made. She sat across from a woman who had spent 3 years on the museum board cultivating the appearance of a passionate arts philanthropist while feeding enemy intelligence through a pipeline that led, eventually, to a plan to kill Monica Makiza and the child she was carrying. Elena was pale, composed, in the way of someone who had prepared for this moment and found that preparation did not, in the end, make it endurable. The charity gala, Monica said. The St. Jude's benefit, 6 weeks earlier, where she and Daniel had appeared together for the first time since the pregnancy news had begun its quiet circulation through the highest levels of New York society. She had worn a gown that concealed the small, new curve of her stomach. Daniel had kept one hand at her back all evening. That was you. Elena said nothing. The route was changed 20 minutes before we arrived. The new route wasn't in any file. Only 4 people knew it. Monica tilted her head. And you, apparently. I want immunity, Elena said. I want a new identity and relocation, and I'll give you everything. Names, contacts, the full operation. Monica looked at her for a long moment. Thought about the gala, about the dark car that had run the traffic light at the corner of Park and 62nd, the one Daniel had pulled her back from with a hand that closed on her arm like a vice, the screech of brakes and the understanding. Arriving seconds later, when the car accelerated rather than stopping, that it had been deliberate. Not an accident. A near miss. A message. She had been 5 months pregnant and someone had tried to run her down on a public street. Give Marcus everything, Monica said. Then we'll discuss what comes next. It came out calm. Even. With no performance of mercy and no display of fury, just the flat, decisive tone of a woman who had learned that power was quietest when it was most absolute. She found out later that Elena had talked for 4 hours. The information was significant enough that Marcus sent a copy to 3 separate encrypted backups and briefed Daniel for 2 hours before bringing Monica into the debrief. The Petrov operation was more organized than they'd understood, not just Volkov remnants, but a new alliance, 3 mid-level organizations pooling resources and intelligence, targeting the Makizas specifically because the Empire's expansion into Brighton Beach, the shipping contracts, and the political connections had made them the most significant independent power in the region. They wanted the territory. And they had decided that the most efficient way to take it was to eliminate the woman Daniel Makiza had told a chapel full of witnesses he would burn the world for. Because men who would burn the world for one person could be undone by that person's loss. Monica sat through the debrief with her hands flat on the table and her expression neutral. She waited until Marcus finished. Then she asked the questions Daniel was too angry to ask clearly. Operational timeline, number of assets identified, gaps in the intelligence. She moved through them methodically, taking notes in the precise, architectural shorthand she'd developed over 6 months of briefings, turning the threat into a map. When she was finished, she looked at Daniel. He was looking back at her with an expression that she'd learned to recognize as the outer edge of something he couldn't say directly. She scared him. Not because she was vulnerable, but because she wasn't. Because she sat in briefings about plots to kill her with the focused confidence of someone planning a counter-strategy rather than the fear he could protect her from, and that competence made him love her in a way that had no adequate language. And love of that magnitude, in Daniel Makiza's experience, was indistinguishable from the specific terror of impending loss. 4 of the identified assets are in custody, Marcus said. The rest are being tracked. Petrov? Daniel asked. Clean hands. Organize the alliance, but there's no evidence that traces to him directly. He'll let the allied organizations take the exposure. Marcus's tone was the dry, precise one that meant he found the intelligence professionally impressive even while despising its source. He's patient. This is a long play. Then we make the next move before he does, Monica said. She was 5.5 months pregnant. She was sitting in a security debrief about a multi-organization plot to kill her. She could feel the baby move, small and certain, for the first time since morning, a flutter that still sent a shock of fierce, protective love through her chest every single time. I have a meeting with the Bratva next week about Brighton Beach, she said. Petrov wants us to cancel it. Or attend it week. We do neither. She paused. We go, we secure the alliance, we cut Petrov off from his eastern flank. And we do it in a way that makes it visible. I want every organization in the city to see exactly what the Makizas do when someone tries to dismantle us from the inside. The silence in the room was the particular kind that precedes a decision becoming real. Daniel's hand found hers under the table, his fingers threading through hers with the ease of a habit they'd built without noticing. She felt the warmth of it, the absolute solidity of his grip. Together, he said. Not a question this time. She squeezed his hand once. Hard. Together. At 5 months, the pregnancy was no longer deniable in the mirror. Monica stood in the dressing room of the private wing and looked at herself with the frank, assessing attention she brought to everything, not vanity, but intelligence gathering. The same way she'd learned to read security reports and power dynamics and the architecture of rooms she might need to escape. The curve was unmistakable now, rounding gently beneath the clothes she'd begun to have remade by the estate's private tailor. She pressed both hands to it and felt the fluttershift of movement, and the fierce love was immediate and ungovernable, arriving before thought could organize it. She was growing an heir to an empire built on blood and loyalty and the particular ruthless love of a man who had lost everything once and rebuilt himself around not losing again. She intended to survive to raise that heir. To that end, she had been doing something she hadn't told Daniel about. At 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, before the household woke to its operational rhythms, she met Kovacs in the third-floor gym. Kovacs was 62 years old, built like a small mountain, and had spent 40 years training the bodies that kept people like Daniel alive. He had looked at Monica with profound skepticism when she'd requested the sessions. She'd showed him what 6 months of self-defense instruction had taught her, and his skepticism had shifted to a kind of guarded professional respect. "You can't do this," he'd said, gesturing at the pregnancy. "I'm not doing combat training," she'd replied. "I'm doing situational awareness. Escape geometry. How to fall, how to get up, how to use a room." She'd paused. How to buy 30 seconds in a hallway. She knew exactly what 30 seconds in a hallway was worth. She had learned it at 3 in the morning, with a gun at her temple and her husband's eyes calculating survival mathematics across an impossible distance. Kovacs had agreed. The other thing she hadn't told Daniel about was the meeting she'd requested with 3 of the capos whose territory bordered the current alliance threat. Not a formal meeting, not a state business, a conversation over coffee at a rotating series of locations that Marcus helped her select for security value. She listened. She asked questions. She made no demands and issued no directives, but she was careful, systematic, and utterly present in a way that left an impression. The impression she was making was intentional. There was a conversation happening below the surface of the empire, the way there always was when power was in flux. Who was Monica Makiza, really? The official answer, Daniel's wife, co-head by board vote, was one kind of answer. The answer that actually mattered in the operational world was different, and it was the kind of answer that had to be demonstrated rather than declared. She was demonstrating it. She found out about the whispers from Marcus, who delivered the intelligence with his customary neutrality. 2 capos, Benedetti and Ortega, had questioned, in private conversation, whether Monica's pregnancy represented a strategic weakness. Not in her capability. Both men knew better than that. But in Daniel's, specifically in Daniel's willingness to take risks or make hard decisions with his unborn child's mother at the table. "That's the real threat," Monica said, when Marcus finished. He tilted his head slightly. The Petrov Alliance is external. This is internal." She paused. "If our own capos think Daniel is compromised by protecting me, we lose authority from inside before any alliance can touch us from outside." She looked at Marcus steadily. "Set up a meeting with Benedetti. Ortega can hear about it afterward." The meeting with Benedetti happened on a Tuesday. She arrived at the agreed restaurant, neutral ground, Marcus and 2 others at the perimeter, and sat across from a man who had been with the Makiza organization for 22 years and had navigated 3 succession crises with the survival instincts of someone who always put one foot on the winning side before the other foot left the losing one. He was careful with her. Respectful. The particular careful respect of a man who was reassessing in real time. She opened with numbers. Production rates, quarterly revenue from his territory, 2 inefficiencies she'd identified in his operations supply chain, and 1 suggestion for addressing them that would increase his yield by an estimated 11%. She'd spent 3 days with the reports. She spoke from memory, without notes, with the easy precision of someone for whom the numbers had become a second language. Benedetti's careful respect recalibrated into something more genuine. By the end of the meeting, she had not threatened him, not issued demands, and not referenced her pregnancy once. She had simply demonstrated, quietly and completely, that whatever Daniel Makiza felt about his wife, Monica Makiza's value to this organization had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with capability. She called Daniel on her way back to the estate. "Good meeting?" he asked, with the particular tone that meant Marcus had already told him everything. "Productive," she said. "Benedetti called me 20 minutes ago. He said, and I'm quoting directly, 'Your wife is the most frightening person I've met in 30 years in this business, and I include you.'" Monica looked out the car window at the city passing by, at the ordinary people in their ordinary lives, at the streets that had once felt foreign and now felt like landscape she could read, move through, survive. "Good," she said. "I want to be clear that I'm deeply in love with you and also that you're going to give me a heart attack before this baby is born." She laughed real, unguarded, the kind of laugh she hadn't had before this life and couldn't imagine having now without it. "Daniel." "Yes. The Petrov situation is going to move before the baby does. We need to be ready." A pause. "I know. Tell me where we are." And he did, for the rest of the drive home, briefing her in the clipped, precise language of a man who had finally, fully, stopped treating her like something to be protected from information and started treating her like what she was. The person he trusted most in a world built on distrust. She met Julian in person on a Wednesday. It was unambiguously and without qualification the worst decision she made in the entire pregnancy. She had waited over 3 days with the same methodical care she brought to everything, running the calculus until she had it mapped from every angle, and she had arrived at a conclusion that felt right, which should have been her first warning. Julian had asked to meet again, through the same encrypted channel. Not a video call this time, in person. He had new intelligence, too significant to trust to any digital medium. He was in Montreal, not Argentina, had been for 2 weeks, which meant he had moved without informing Daniel's people, which meant Daniel's people had lost track of him, which was itself a piece of information that required a decision. She went without telling Daniel. She told herself several very reasonable things about this choice on the drive to the airport, in the private terminal, on the 40-minute flight north. She told herself that if she told Daniel, he would refuse, and that refusal would be the wrong call. She told herself that Julian's intelligence had proven accurate once, and the stakes of a second accurate intelligence were too high to dismiss. She told herself that she was a co-head of the Makiza Empire and did not require permission to make operational decisions. She told herself all of this and still knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to be honest with herself, that the real reason she didn't tell Daniel was simpler. She didn't want to fight about it. She was 6 months pregnant and tired, and the marriage had been a sustained negotiation about autonomy for weeks, and she made a choice born of exhaustion rather than strategy. Julian met her in a private room above a Montreal restaurant, arranged by the contact she'd used for the Benedetti meeting. He was alone. He looked better than he had on the video call, more solid, less hollowed out, as if the weeks since their conversation had given him something to focus on that was outside himself. The intelligence was real. She knew it within 15 minutes of his opening. Petrov had a timeline. 6 weeks, possibly fewer, keyed to her 3rd trimester, specifically to the period when medical appointments would create predictable vulnerabilities, regular routes, repeated schedules, the structural patterns of prenatal care. The alliance had 3 phases. First, eliminate Daniel's political connections by exposing compromising information they'd spent months accumulating. Second, create operational chaos in 2 territories simultaneously. Third, during the chaos, with Daniel's attention divided and Monica's movements constrained by late pregnancy, move against her directly. Julian had gotten this through a contact he'd cultivated in the Petrov operation over the past 3 months, a low-level operative who had reasons of his own to want the alliance disrupted. Reasons Julian had found and leveraged with the particular skill of someone raised in a world where information was currency. "Why?" she asked when he finished. "You could have sent this through the encrypted channel." "Because I needed to see your face when I told you the 3rd phase isn't just about you." She waited. "The plan for the 3rd phase involves the baby." He said it flatly, no cushioning. "They want a Makiza era's leverage. Not killed. Taken." The cold that moved through her was different from any cold she'd felt before. Not the operational cold, the practiced chill that let her function in dangerous rooms. Something older, more biological, more absolute. She pressed one hand instinctively to her stomach under the table. "Documentation," she said, and was proud of how steady her voice was. He slid a folder across the table. She was halfway through it when her phone began vibrating with a pattern she'd configured specifically for Daniel. 5 short, 2 long, then continuous. The pattern that meant he knew where she was and he was not, in any sense of the word, okay. She looked at Julian. He looked back at her. "How long have you known the meeting was compromised?" she asked. 20 minutes after I arranged it." He met her eyes. "One of the restaurant staff recognized my face. Called it in. I don't know to whom." He paused. "I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd track me this fast." Monica stood, gathering the folder with precise, unhurried movements, and answered Daniel's call. "I'm coming home," she said, before he could speak. The silence on the other end had a specific texture, the texture of a man holding himself very still around something that, if it moved, would stop being controlled. "Come home," he said finally. "Now." The flight back was the longest 40 minutes of her marriage. Daniel was waiting in the foyer. The staff had made themselves invisible. Marcus was present but positioned near the door, which was his way of indicating this was a conversation, not a debrief, and he was available if required, but choosing not to be involved unless invited. She and Daniel stood in the foyer and looked at each other, and she could see it all, the fear, the fury, the betrayal, the love so fierce it had no language except anger. She had seen him frightening before. She had seen him in full operational mode, in the aftermath of violence, at the negotiating table with people who wanted him dead. She had never seen him like this, the particular face of a man who understood that the thing he feared most was not an external enemy, but the choices of someone he trusted absolutely. "I know," she said. "You." "I know." She held the folder out to him. "Read this first." He took it. He read it standing in the foyer, not moving to the library or the study, reading with the rapid, comprehensive attention of someone who processed threat intelligence at a physical level. His body's stillness deepening with each page until he was almost architecturally motionless. When he finished, he looked up. His face had shifted entirely, the personal displaced by the operational, because in the Makiza world, that was what you did with fear, you turned it into clarity. "They're targeting the baby," he said. "Yes." "You want to get this information?" "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." She met his eyes. "And I would not make the same choice again. Not because I was wrong about the intelligence, I was right about that. But because I was wrong about you." She paused. "You were not someone who would refuse a decision because it frightened you. I treated you like you were, and that was wrong." Another silence. Longer than the first. "We're going to talk about this," he said. "Yes, we are. Not tonight. Tonight we plan." She nodded. The fight would come real, honest, the kind that only happened between people who trusted each other enough to be genuinely angry, but it would come after the immediate crisis had a response. They were, both of them, professionals above everything else. "Tonight we plan," she agreed. Marcus appeared at the study door. "I'll get the board." And the Makizas went to work. The fight happened on a Friday, 3 days after Montreal, and it was the most honest thing they had ever said to each other. It was not, as Monica had expected, primarily about the meeting. She had expected anger, the cold, surgical kind that Daniel wore so well, specific and targeted and designed to be correct rather than merely loud. She had prepared for it, had her own arguments assembled with the same methodical care she brought to board meetings, her reasons, her acknowledgement of where she'd been wrong, the line between the legitimate and the indefensible. But Daniel didn't fight the way she'd expected. He told her he was terrified. He sat across from her in the library, their library, the one she'd remade in cream and light, and said it with the flat, declarative tone of a man issuing a report rather than making a confession. He was terrified, he said, specifically in the way he had been terrified exactly once before, after Isabel, after the Red Autumn. In the years of Julian's childhood, when he'd understood with bone-deep certainty that love was not a defense, but an exposure, a wound deliberately made in the center of your most vital function. He had made himself a target for 30 years, and it had cost him less than caring about one person for 6 months. Monica listened without interrupting, which was one of the hardest things she had ever done, and she had done some very hard things. When he finished, she said, "I am not Isabel. I know. I am not someone who needs to be kept behind glass, because the world outside will destroy me. I am someone who has survived 4 attempts on my life, 1 siege, 1 poisoning attempt, exile of a stepson, dismantling of an enemy organization, and 7 months of you trying to simultaneously love me and control me." She paused. "And I am still here." "You are still here," he said, and something in his voice fractured on the last word, the carefully maintained surface cracking along a line that had been under pressure for months. She crossed the library and sat beside him on the small sofa he'd brought in from the East Wing, the one she'd chosen specifically because it was too small for separate corners, too intimate for maintained distance. She took both his hands in hers and held them, not gently but firmly, the way you held something that mattered. "I should have told you," she said. "Not because I needed permission. Because you were my partner, and it was important information, and keeping it from you was something I did out of exhaustion, not strategy, and that was wrong." She paused. "And you need to stop making operational decisions about my safety without consulting me, because I am co-head of this family and my judgment in the field has been accurate, and treating it as subordinate to your fear is going to get one of us killed." Daniel looked at their intertwined hands for a long time. "When you told Dimitri to shoot Julian," he said, "in the hallway, that night I knew in that moment that you were the most dangerous person I'd ever married. I'd only married one person before. Even so." The corner of his mouth moved, barely. "I loved you for it, and it also meant I knew you would never be safe in the way I wanted you to be safe." "No," she agreed. "I won't." "I know." He turned his hands over, gripping hers instead. "I am trying, Monica. Every day I am trying to give you the space you require without feeling like I am repeating a mistake that I don't fully recover from." She squeezed his hands. "We are not going to repeat it. Because we talk about it, even when it's difficult, and because I will not walk into a situation without telling you again, and because you are going to trust my confidence even when it terrifies you." She met his eyes. "Deal?" "Deal," he said. Then the baby moved a distinct, unmistakable kick, hard enough that she felt it visibly, a small revolution against the inside of her ribs, and they both stopped, and Daniel's hand moved to her stomach without thought. And the shift on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. Pure, unguarded wonder, the face of a man feeling for the second time in his life the particular terror and joy of loving someone he hadn't met yet. "Hello," he said quietly, to the movement under his palm. Monica covered his hand with hers. The baby kicked again. And the Empire, for one suspended moment, was just 3 people in a cream-walled room, breathing the same air, held in the same fragile and ferocious circle of love. That evening, Monica developed the complication, sudden, frightening, the kind that cleared a room of everything except the immediate biology of survival. The estate's physician arrived within 7 minutes. The 2 hours that followed were the longest of Daniel's life, and possibly of Monica's, though she spent them with the clinical focus of someone who had decided to be fine through sheer force of will. She was fine. The baby was fine. The physician was cautious, specific, and direct. This was a stress response. Her body's way of insisting on what her mind had been overriding for months. "Rest," the physician said. Monica looked at her. "Define rest." 48 hours of bed rest, then reduced schedule for 1 week. No emotional confrontations, no high-stress operational meetings. "How minimal?" "Monica." Daniel's voice was very quiet. It had the particular quality that it sometimes had when he was not making a request. She looked at him. Thought about the baby. Thought about what winning looked like when the stakes were this specific. 48 hours, she said. She spent the 48 hours in bed, which she negotiated into a mobile office situation by hour 6. Daniel was present, which turned into something neither of them expected, 2 days of sustained, uninterrupted conversation, the kind that marriage rarely had space for when it was also an empire. They talked about Isabel, really talked, not the careful version Daniel deployed to explain his fear, but the real version, the one with the specific details that made it human rather than mythological. They talked about Monica's mother, whom Daniel had never asked about and whom Monica had never offered, and that conversation went places she hadn't anticipated and left her lighter in a way that felt structural, as if something that had been load-bearing weight could finally be set down. They talked about names. They didn't decide. But they talked about it for 3 hours, which was its own kind of decision. By the end of the 48 hours, the fight had finished composting into something else, a deeper, less defended understanding of each other, the kind that only happens when circumstance removes every option except honesty. Daniel cared for her with a tenderness that had no performance in it, nothing except the simple, fierce attention of a man with exactly one priority. She let him. Not as weakness, not as capitulation, but as the specific act of trust that she had promised him on the rooftop and been working toward ever since. When the physician cleared her on Sunday morning, Monica sat up, looked at Daniel, and said, "I need to get back to work." He handed her the morning briefing. "It's been waiting since Friday," he said. Marcus said something about the Petrov timeline moving forward. She scanned the first page. "Call a meeting," she said. The attacks came on 3 fronts simultaneously, which was how they were designed. The first was the shipping operation, a series of inspections by the Port Authority, coordinated through a federal contact whose loyalty to the Mafia organization had apparently been purchased by someone offering more than Daniel paid. 3 vessels held. Significant cargo delayed. Enough disruption to require immediate operational attention. The second was the Bratva Alliance, a carefully engineered miscommunication, planted in the negotiations by someone with access to both parties, designed to make the Maquisas appear to have violated a territorial agreement they had in fact honored. It required immediate personal intervention to prevent collapse. The third was the estate itself. Monica was in the study reviewing the shipping reports when the alert system went active, not the general alarm, the specific pattern Daniel had established for perimeter breach. 2 short bursts followed by continuous, meaning armed entry. Multiple points, coordinated. She was 7 months pregnant. She moved to the secure landline and called Marcus before the alert had finished its 3rd cycle. "Report. 4-point breach," Marcus said, and his voice was operational flat, the tone of a man who had trained his entire career for this precise situation. East gate, service entrance, north wall, and a pause, very brief. The parking structure. The parking structure was the internal garage, which meant someone was already inside. "Daniel?" she asked. "En route from the Bratva meeting. 20 minutes out." A pause. "He knows." She heard his voice in the background, brief and absolute. She heard the particular way he said her name, the compressed urgency of it, and she felt the distance between them as a physical weight. "I'm taking the safe room," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. Now. The safe room was disguised as a walk-in closet, reinforced steel behind cedar panels, independent air supply, communications array, enough provisions for 72 hours. She had been in it once before, during a drill, and had hated the dimensions of it, the closed-in press of walls on all sides, the way it removed all the sensory information she'd come to rely on for situational awareness. She went. But she went the way she went everywhere now, not passively, not with the resigned compliance of someone accepting protection. She went as a person who had a role in this. She had the communications array. She had the estate's security feed, live, on a tablet that Marcus had left in the safe room 3 weeks ago with the specific instruction, "In an emergency, you direct from here." She directed. For 94 minutes, Monica Maquisa ran the defensive operation of the estate from inside a reinforced closet, working the communications array with the focused efficiency she'd spent 7 months building. She tracked the breach teams, coordinated response positions, identified 2 vulnerabilities in the estate's defensive corridor that weren't covered by the primary teams and directed coverage there. She stayed on comms with Marcus, with the security lead, with the two capos whose local teams were close enough to provide backup within 20 minutes. She could feel the baby moving through most of it, smaller, more frequent movements, as if responding to the adrenaline flooding her body, and every time she felt it she made herself breathe out slowly and refocus. Daniel arrived at the estate during the 41st minute of the breach. She heard his voice enter the comms in a way that was unmistakable, the specific register of a man redirecting absolute, consuming fear into operational function, burning the terror as fuel. He took the situation report from Marcus in under 60 seconds, absorbed it completely, and issued 3 directives that reorganized the defensive positioning in ways that closed the 2 vulnerabilities she'd already identified. She keyed her comms. "I already redirected coverage on those," she said. A silence. Very brief. "I see it," Daniel said. "Good." She heard something in those 2 words that she would remember later, when she had time to examine it. Not surprise, exactly. More like the moment when something you believed theoretically became something you knew in the bone. She had told him she was capable. He had believed her. And in a 90-second exchange on a secure channel, with armed men moving through the estate above their heads, he finally felt it. Julian's role was revealed in the 68th minute. He had been in Montreal, then in New York, and the Petrov contact he'd cultivated had apparently been a 2-way relationship. Julian had been feeding intelligence out of the Petrov operation to Monica, and simultaneously, the Petrov operative had been feeding Julian's movements and intelligence methods back to the Alliance. Not because Julian was working against them, because the Alliance had seen Julian's contact with Monica as an opportunity and turned his operative against him. Julian had known, for approximately a week, that his intelligence pipeline was compromised. He had chosen not to warn them through normal channels. He had chosen instead to walk through the front gate of the Makiza estate on a Tuesday morning, alone, without informing anyone, and present himself to the estate's perimeter security with his hands visible. This Monica learned from the estate's security feed, live in the safe room, 17 minutes before the all-clear. She watched the feed as Daniel emerged from the north wing and crossed the forecourt toward his son. She could not hear what was said. She watched the body language, Julian's careful stillness, the particular posture of a man who has decided to stop calculating outcomes and do something regardless. She watched Daniel's face, unreadable from the camera angle, as Julian spoke. She watched the moment when Daniel stopped moving. Then Daniel put his hand on his son's shoulder. Not affectionately, not with warmth, with a specific, functional acknowledgement of someone being told a useful thing by someone he does not yet trust. Julian had given them the entry point. The breach team's communication method, the frequency they were using, the code rotation. Information that allowed Marcus's team to intercept and coordinate the final sweep in under 9 minutes. The all-clear came at 11:47 p.m. Monica emerged from the safe room, moving through the estate with 2 bodyguards behind her and the communications tablet still in her hand. Daniel met her in the main hallway, and she saw in his face the particular composite of a man who was simultaneously relieved, shaken, proud, and operating on the far edge of whatever composure he had left. He crossed to her. His hands came to her face, both of them, holding her as if he was checking that she was real. "You ran the coordination," he said. "Someone had to." His forehead came to rest against hers, both of them breathing the same air in the quiet hallway, the estate settling around them with the sounds of a siege being cleaned up. "Julian," she asked. "Inside. Marcus is with him." A pause. He took a bullet coming over the east wall. His operative had turned on him. He came in anyway. Monica was quiet for a moment. Is he going to survive? Yes. She thought about the hallway, 18 months ago, standing over Dmitry Volkov's fallen man, telling Daniel to shoot his son. She thought about Julian's face on the video screen, diminished and honest for the first time she'd ever known him. She thought about the file he'd handed across a Montreal restaurant table, at no small risk to himself, because he had needed to look her in the eye and say the thing he needed to say. "I want to see him before they move him," she said. Daniel searched her face. "Why?" She thought about it for a moment. Because I need him to know that surviving this doesn't give him anything back. That what he did has permanent consequences. She paused. And because I think he needs to hear that from me more than from you. Daniel's hand moved to her stomach, still, always, the first instinct. The baby shifted under his palm. 5 minutes, he said. The estate was quiet at 4 in the morning, in the particular way of a house that had been through violence and was settling back into itself. Monica sat with Julian for 12 minutes, which was longer than the 5 Daniel had offered, but felt like the correct number, arrived at without deliberation. He was in the infirmary on the 2nd floor, with a gunshot wound to the left shoulder that was professionally clean and would heal without complication. He looked pale and certain in the way she had not seen on him before, as if the calculations had all been done and the results accepted. She sat across from him and did not perform either coldness or warmth, because neither was honest. You could have sent the information through the channel, she said. You didn't have to come. No, he agreed. Why? Julian looked at the window, at the dark beyond it. Because the information was the minimum, he said. And minimum didn't feel like enough. He paused. For what I did. Monica was quiet for a moment. It's not, she said. It isn't enough. There isn't enough, Julian. She kept her voice level, not cruel, simply true. There are things that can't be paid back. What I'm telling you is that I know you understand that now, and that going forward, that understanding matters. She stood. You'll recover. When you do, you'll return to Argentina. The conditions are the same. He nodded, and in his face she saw something she hadn't expected, not resentment, not even grief. Something closer to relief. The specific relief of a man who had expected judgment and received something more exacting, clear terms, honest acknowledgement, and no pretense that the ledger balanced. The baby, he said. If it's a girl. She waited. Isabel was kind, he said quietly. She was genuinely kind. In a world that wasn't. I don't remember her. I know her from what I've been told and the one photograph I kept. He stopped. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought she was good. She deserved someone to say that who knew her. Monica stood in the doorway of the infirmary and looked at Julian Makiza, who had been her enemy and was neither her friend nor her ally and was, regardless of all of that, the only person in the world who carried Daniel's face and Isabel's history. And she felt the particular, complicated weight of a world in which nothing was simple and people were rarely only one thing. I'll tell Daniel you said that, she said. She left before she felt anything she wasn't ready to feel. The labor started at 11:17 on a Thursday morning, 6 days before the due date, while Monica was reviewing quarterly reports in the library. The timing was, in hindsight, entirely characteristic. The baby arrived on no one's schedule but its own, indifferent to the operational conveniences of its parents, unconcerned with the cleanup effort still underway in the estate's East Wing. She called Daniel first. He was in a meeting with the Bratva representative, finalizing the alliance terms that the breach had complicated. She heard the exact moment he received the message, the fractional pause in the conversation, the very careful way he said, "I need to step out," and the pace of his footsteps audible through the phone as he moved toward the car. "I'm fine," she said, when he picked up. "It's early stages. Drive safely." He was at the estate in 19 minutes, which, given traffic and distance, was not physically possible without decisions she chose not to examine. The estate's physician had Monica in the prepared birthing suite on the 3rd floor within 30 minutes of the first contraction, with 2 medical staff and the particular calm competence of someone who had overseen this once before for this family. Under very different circumstances. Daniel was present for all of it, not hovering, which had been their agreement, but close, which was his nature. Monica had expected the pain to be something she could organize herself around, could apply the same methodical focus she brought to everything. She had been, in this specific estimation, slightly wrong. But she was not fragile. She spent 14 hours being the most stubbornly competent person in the room, which was the only way she knew how to do anything. At several points the physician suggested additional medication. At several more points Daniel stood at her shoulder with his jaw set and his hand in hers and said absolutely nothing, which was the right thing, and she was grateful for it. She had asked for honesty and presence and the specific understanding that she did not need to be managed through this, only accompanied, and he gave her all of that. At 1:42 in the morning, Isabel Makiza entered the world with the particular decisive energy of someone who had decided it was time and was not interested in negotiating. Daniel held her for the first time with the same stillness he brought to everything that mattered, the absolute, collected presence of a man concentrating every reserve of himself on one small, extraordinary thing. His daughter. His second chance at something he had been certain he didn't deserve. She weighed 6 pounds and 11 ounces, and she had Monica's defiant jaw and what the physician suggested might, in time, become Daniel's eyes. He did not cry. He was, after all, Daniel Makiza, and Daniel Makiza had 30 years of practiced invulnerability. But Monica, watching from the bed, exhausted and absolute and more certain of herself than she had ever been, saw his hands tremble, barely, just once, before he steadied them. She filed it away in the particular archive she kept of Daniel's real moments, the ones beneath the performance of control. She thought about the name. Had thought about it for weeks, turning it over. Had not told Daniel she decided, had wanted to wait until she knew for certain. Isabel, she said. Daniel looked up from their daughter's face. His winter ice eyes, softer than she had ever seen them, met hers across the room. Yes, he said. Marcus knocked on the door at 3 in the morning, which was exactly what Monica had expected. Marcus did not permit sentiment to override professionalism for long, and she found she was grateful. She was, despite everything, still co-head of an empire that had spent the past 48 hours under coordinated attack. Petrov, she asked. Marcus came into the room, looked at the small person in Daniel's arms, and permitted himself 3 seconds of human reaction before his face reorganized. Contained, he said. The alliance fell apart when the breach failed. 2 of the 3 organizations have requested quiet negotiations. The third is relocating. Permanently? Daniel asked. Relocating, Marcus said again, which was its own kind of answer. Monica leaned her head back against the pillows. Outside the windows of the 3rd floor, the estate gardens were invisible in the dark, but she knew them now the way she knew every room of this house, by instinct, by repeated navigation, by the accumulated knowledge of a life built in a particular place. Come morning they would be there, the roses her predecessor had planted and she had kept, the jasmine on the rooftop, the stone balustrade where a bird had landed once and been gone before she could track it. She would show Isabel the gardens in the spring. 1 year later, exactly, she stood on the rooftop garden at sunset. Isabel was on her hip, occupying herself with intense investigation of Monica's earring, the particular focus of a 1-year-old convinced that everything in the world was personally significant. The jasmine was blooming. Daniel stood at the railing looking out at the city, his back to the door, silver threading further through his hair, a quality of stillness about him that was different from the controlled stillness of the operational world, something resting, rather than coiled. He heard her approach. He always did. Report, he said. Your daughter has strong opinions about jewelry, Monica said, and transferred Isabel to his arms in the easy, practiced transfer of people who have learned each other's bodies through a year of shared labor. Daniel took his daughter the way he now held everything that mattered to him, like she was both precious and permanent, not fragile. Marcus says the Bratva alliance is holding. The shipping operation is up 14%. And Benedetti wants to discuss the Northern Territory expansion. I know. I read the morning brief. He shifted Isabel, who was now applying the same investigative intensity to his watch. What are you not telling me? She considered the gardens, the city beyond them, the empire beyond that. Thought about Julian in Argentina, sending quarterly reports that she read but never acknowledged. About Claire in her Midwestern diner. About Elena, somewhere under a different name with different deaths. About the world she had walked into on a pair of champagne-colored heels and remade, methodically, into something that fit the shape of who she was. I got a message today, she said. Through the encrypted channel. Daniel went very still. Not Julian, she said. Someone new. An organization we've been watching, the one that absorbed what was left of the Second Petrov Alliance. They want to talk. She paused. To both of us. Together. The city glittered below. Isabel made a small decisive sound, either about the watch or about the universe in general. The jasmine moved in the evening wind. Together, Daniel said. Together, she agreed. He turned to look at her, his daughter settled against his chest with the ease of a year's practice, his winter ice eyes warm in the way they'd become warm, not soft, never soft, but lit from within, the difference between ice in a freezer and ice in sunlight. He reached for her hand. She gave it. They stood on the rooftop, the three of them, as the city came alive below. An empire built on blood and loyalty and the particular ruthless love of two people who had found each other in the wreckage of betrayal and built something fierce and unbreakable from what remained. Monica Makiza, née Gray, formerly small, formerly disposable, formerly the girlfriend who'd held her composure while her heart broke in a library that smelled of old leather and secrets. Now this. She looked at her daughter's face. At her husband's. At the city that feared the name she carried. No regrets, she thought. Not one. And on the rooftop at sunset, with the jasmine blooming and the empire holding and the story writing its next chapter in the darkening air below, Monica Makiza smiled. And meant it.